So welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. Today, delighted to be joined by Joe Glover. Joe's very welcome to the podcast, and let's begin by asking Joe to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about his journey and all the wonderful things that is involved in. So over to you, Joe.
It's a real pleasure, and thank you for having me. It's a delight. So my name's Joe. I run something called the Marketing Meetup, which is a global community for marketers. We're about 38,000 people strong now. And the line that we tend to speak about is that we educate, connect, and build confidence in marketers, and do it all with kindness. Really, the genesis for all of that is that I am way more introverted than I am extroverted, and specifically at networking events. And I remember as a 24-year-old going into those events and just being terrified to say hello to someone. But even when I did, then people would walk up to me and sort of say, "What's your job title?" or "What's your budget?" And as an introvert, I don't always really enjoy that sort of small talk element of things. I like to build a human connection first, and then kind of, that's where the lifting off point is for a business relationship as much as a personal one. And so with that knowledge and with that terror, then I began doing a networking event in a canteen in Cambridge with the pure intention of bringing people together in a place which felt safe and kind. It was kind of mission achieved right there and then. But from that moment forwards, then things kind of grew in an unexpected way, or certainly not a way that I intended. A very long story short, today, the Marketing Meetup will run about 196 in-person events across 35 locations this year. We'll run about 50 webinars. Yesterday, we had 5,000 people sign up for this event, which was crazy. And it's just the greatest joy of it all is that we bring people together, and those values have stayed true throughout the course of this growth. It's 7 years in the making now. And I'm happy with slow growth. I'm happy with a community that feels organic and meaningful. And so that's where we are. It's been a mad journey, but one that's been very, very enjoyable.
Thanks for sharing that, Joe. And it all came out of this introverted beginning. And quite often, people who are introverts, particularly at networking events, it takes an awful lot out of somebody to be at those kind of in-person networking events. And I love the fact that you said, it's a 7-year journey, because it doesn't happen overnight. You don't get to the level of community that you've grown overnight. So were there any points along the journey where you suddenly felt, do you know what, this is really working, this is really taking off? Or have you just been hanging on for dear life over the last 7 years, Joe?
No, I don't think I'd ever allow myself the thought that this is really working. People have said those words to me, but I don't think it ever really helps to sort of rest on your laurels all too much. I think it's one of those things that I think gratitude for the moment is so important. And so one does need to acknowledge that. And I think over the course of time, when someone said things are going quite well, my journey probably started from a place of saying, "Oh, no, they're not," to right now sort of saying, "Thank you very much." And that's probably as far as I've got in terms of sort of accepting that things are going good. But I think there's a broader principle there, which is that you need to keep on moving forward. I don't think you need to keep on moving forward for the sake of being seen all the time. I don't think you need to be loud all the time. But I think what you do need to do if you want a thing to grow is keep on working hard. And I will allow myself that it's been hard work that's been put into this community, and I'm okay with that, because I get as much back as what I put in, for sure, from hearing folks sort of say how it's helped them with their confidence journey.
And I know you're very focused on it being this sort of really nice community place where people can share, they can come and listen, they can connect, but it's done from a really nice perspective. And it's not, I think you mentioned at the top, it's kind of not title driven or overexposure driven. It's about making that genuine connection and that genuine community. So how do you how have you sort of curated that, or how have you made sure that that essence remains true today?
I love that. Love that question. Thank you for it as well. I think there's a couple of things that play into it. The first is that we never targeted huge growth, right? You know, we never said we need to 10x this tomorrow, or we're gonna, you know, and our business model is predicated on that growth. We've always done what we've done, and we've done it well, and believe that if we do that thing well, speak about it regularly, then it will work. And so far so good type of thing. So I think slow growth, which leads into an acceptance of cultural norms. So the Marketing Meetup has a strong culture, one that has been growing over the course of time, which means that you have a core group of people who represent that culture. And the way that we think and speak about that is that we speak about the community not being a me activity, it's something that we create together, which means there is a responsibility for folks who join Marketing Meetup events to come and embody a series of values and sort of acknowledge those and be part of those. And you opt in or opt out on that basis. I mean, I'm sure that there's a bunch of people who have come to our events over the course of time who are like, I'm not coming back. And that's fine. You know, that's what positioning is for, you know, that's what culture is for, you know, that's having an opinion. That's what that is for. And so that's been really important. The third element that I think is really important as part of all of that is over communication. And so we've got a term that we use with the Marketing Meetup, which is positively lovely, which means to say that when you come to one of our events, you're expected to be kind, and you're expected to help other human beings first, and then expect to get something back later. And with the expectation of positively lovely, we speak about it all the time. It's on our slides, it's in our branding, it's on the sign-up pages, it's in the emails that we send. Every one of these are reinforcers of the social norms that we put in place. So there's a very conscious communication of, this is what's expected of you, you know, and it's fine if you don't want to be part of it. We think it's good, you know, we think it's really good and we enjoy it, but, you know, we know it's not for everyone. But if you would like to be part of this, then welcome home. And we've literally got that on our newsletter sequence. The first one ends in welcome home, because I think for a lot of folks, without meaning to overstate the importance of a brand, because as Mr. Ritson says, brands are tiny, tiny things. But for some people, then they deeply resonate with the community, because that's what communities are, the great human experiences.
I love that, Joe, and I love the welcome home because it helps you feel part of something, and it's two simple words, but the meaning that it conveys is really important. And you mentioned positively lovely as well. Two other simple words, but together very, very powerful. And you know, with people who receive the positively lovely newsletter, I mean, how great to get a positively lovely newsletter for a change, you know.
I think you're right. It's that the word that people use quite regularly is refreshing, you know, and I'm not saying that about us necessarily, but I think in a wider context, positive stuff is just refreshing, right? And we've got so used to other things that it's quite pleasant to have that thing where there is some positivity in the world, and it can be found and it can be shared with other human beings, and that's what it's all about.
Now, I don't want to share the secret sauce per se, but I would like you maybe to unpack a little bit some of the mechanics of it, because I've touched on the newsletter there.
Yeah.
And you have this podcast, this sort of interview series where you mentioned Mark Ritson a moment ago, which is very well known within the sort of marketing world, very insightful and sometimes opinionated, and also runs a great MBA course on the world of marketing. And I know you've interviewed Mark and other people like Rory Sutherland. And I know you said to me previously that you don't so much interview Rory Sutherland, he kind of interviews you, which I think is spot on. But between the in-person events, the newsletter, the sort of interviews that you're doing, how do you actually organize that? You know, what's that look like from a structural perspective? Because you mentioned at the top the sheer amount of events you're doing this year sounds like a full-time job. So how are you organizing all that behind the scenes? How does all that work together?
course. So I work a 4-day week. So I do 4 days. Monday is my daddy day. So I've got a 2-year-old daughter. So that's me. 4-day week. I'm still very much in the weeds with a lot of stuff. I write the newsletter myself. I host our webinar series myself, and I also run Cambridge and London as events. So that's me primarily, and then one of the things that comes as a result of building a business to a certain extent around a personal brand is one also gets a decent chunk of emails to work through on a regular. So that's me. We also have the world's loveliest human being, Elle, who works for us. Elle is part-time at TMM, and she heads up our events. She's a really interesting person. She used to organize choirs around the world, but now does marketing events, but is just incredible. On it, lovely, smart, positive, to just consistently. So Elle does the event stuff. We've also got our co-founder James, who is runs his own agency. James does what he can on the Marketing Meetup, but he's not in every day. His focus and priority has to be on his agency. We also then have a small army of freelancers, from graphic designers to videographers, and then last but certainly not least, we have a series of volunteers who run local events close to their home. So typically these folks organize themselves in teams. So say if you have 35 events, 35 locations, on average, you will have 2 to 3 people who will help run each of those events. So there's about 100 people who sort of come together to run TMM events around the world, which is the first time I've said that out loud, which is crazy. But really, as a core team, there's only really Elle and I, and then James. That's how we do things. We work with the volunteers, and I think one of the biggest priorities over this past year has been about process. It's about process and standardization, and not standardization in the sense that we don't want to become McDonald's. We don't want to be the same when you walk into every location. But what we've tried to do is capture the essence of everything that makes TMM special, and then provide a series of training programs that enables us to be able to describe and inform people to be able to do this for themselves. So really, that's where we are on our journey right now, is like, we want to expand our locations, not because growth is good by itself, but because growth befits impact. So to find that impact, we need to have more events. And so to do that, then we needed to find a way that we could convey our values and how we run TMM events in a way which works and is simple to understand, but also effective. So it's been a big journey. It feels like we're growing up a little bit. And I'm discovering my place in what all that means, because I've always been the person who does everything, and I'm slowly figuring out that I'm actually getting in the way of so much stuff that I need to get out of it, which is nice as well, actually, too. I don't want to be the bottleneck on things. I want to be out of the way on things I'm bad at and contribute on things I'm good at. So yeah, it's good.
I love that, Joe. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. It's great to hear that, because I suppose it's back to that journey. There's a lot of hard work that's gone into it, that continues to go into it. But it's also useful for people to see, well, how do I structure that? How does that actually work behind the scenes, the mechanics of it? And the last thing I'm going to ask you about this, because I do want to move on and ask you some other stuff. But just in terms of the interviewing and the podcasting,
Yes.
because you have the Marketing Meetup and you share those videos. I know you've got the YouTube channel, etc. And I mentioned a couple of the people, but you've got some really, really great guests on there.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've something else as well, which is Humans Come First.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So could you maybe just give us a little bit of flavor of both of those and what goes into that? Because I know that's a lot of work too. Speaking from somebody on, in a podcast right now, there's a lot of heavy lifting in that,
Yeah, although so on Humans Come First, I can claim a lot less of the credit. So to speak about the Marketing Meetup, then in terms of curation and sort of production very quickly, then curation is something I probably have identified as a strength of mine. And typically my research is primarily LinkedIn, and for the most part, you're approached rather than pitch to speak at the Marketing Meetup, which means to say that we tend to find folks who are doing good things and then ask them to come along. That's really important because on a couple of levels. The first is that no one pays to speak at the Marketing Meetup, which I think is a good thing because the context in which they enter our situation is, I'm here to give, and given the size of the community now, they know they're going to get back. It kind of is that, but they're here to give. They don't need to sort of justify their ROI on their spend. So that's really important. In terms of then how we use that, then every webinar is then turned into a YouTube, podcast, blog post, newsletter. So we've got a good sort of content flow. With Humans Come First, that was actually a side project with Rich Wood, who is a friend, really. And Rich suggested doing this over lockdown, and the idea behind Humans Come First was to provide a space where we could discuss marketing in a way where it sort of went away from the typical sort of scientific elements of marketing and actually sort of broached into like, you know what, I mean, like a lot of marketing is quite messy because humans are messy, and we're kind of making it up as we go, and we've got these theories over here, but you know what, humans are funny things. And so it was all about putting the humanity back into marketing, having these conversations. And really, it's just a couple of guys who enjoy this stuff, getting together and doing that. Mechanically, we get together pretty much every quarter and we batch record our sessions. We go to WeWork and do that. We're hoping to bring a bit of professionalization to it soon. We're sort of like recording it with video and then snippet it up and stuff like that. But for the meantime, batch recording is the way to do it because his agency, Six and Flow, is like, I think it's #1 in the world on their partners. So, he's done incredibly well. He's busier than I am, put it that way. So yeah, that's a bit of fun, but also something that probably speaks to the core of everything that probably relates to the Marketing Meetup, which is we're just human beings. Nobody was born as a marketer. We found this passion, we found this thing that we enjoy, and we decided to pursue it. But you could have been something else, and you would have still been you. And I think that's pretty much the essence behind Humans Come First too.
Thanks, Joe. And I'm assuming then during the lockdown that you mentioned, you had to lean heavily, as we all did, into the online elements, so the webinars and the interviews, etc. But now you're right back in the in-person events, and that seems to be growing scarily fast.
It's crazy. Yes, yeah. We're now in a world of both, and so the way that we think about webinars and online events is that webinars are primarily for education, and in-person events are primarily for connection. And if there's one thing that I can say to the benefit of in-person events in particular is that they are the true essence of community, really. People coming together to lift each other up, to have conversations with one another, make each other stronger than they would be alone. That's best done in person. There's a lot of power done in webinars, in blogs, in podcasts. But if you want the essence of connection, then I think that's best done. Not that it can't be done, but it's best done in person. So yeah, that's where we're
Thanks for sharing that, Joe. So look, I want to change gear a little bit because I don't want to run out of time, because I know we're both extremely busy with all this wonderful stuff. And, I love what you're doing, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about, from a personal perspective, when you're learning or onboarding information, or whether you're just reading or watching something for pleasure or for business, how does that work for you from a learning style? Do you like the physical book, the audio book? Do you prefer just talking to people at an event? Do you listen to a lot of podcasts yourself, or none at all? How does that work for you?
Yeah, so I'm an audiobook person. So I fall asleep if I start reading a book, presumably because I'm sat down. So yeah, I'm an audiobook person all the way. Likewise with podcasts. The nature of my job means that I get a filling of marketing content every day. So really, in terms of professional development, I've got a bit of a cheat code in a sense because my job sort of enforces that upon me. and so I spend most of my time outside of the marketing meetup actually listening to things, whether it is audiobooks or podcasts on history, or indeed, like my favorite favorite podcast is The Rest is Politics. And then outside of that, sort of football related podcasts too. So those are the three strands. And I think the best thing I did last year, or certainly one of them, was getting out of a flow of just opening up the BBC app all of the time, and instead subscribing to the Week magazine and starting to read Al Jazeera or online as my source of news. And the reason why I say both of those two things were beneficial was that it broadened my perspective beyond just the UK's borders into the wider world, and placed our living in context, much in the same way as history does. And so, those have become my sources that are useful and relevant. But I think that slightly more worldly perspective, trying to learn and listen about things that don't sort of relate to your day-to-day job is so important.
Yeah, and do you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because Al Jazeera English, for me, I do watch, as I do lots of other media channels from around the world, because I think you can get trapped in a bubble. And particularly in the UK or the BBC, for example, it is one flavour of an international news story. So whether regardless of your politics or your views on various establishments, I think you've made a very valid point there, because how stories are told around the world is not the same, and it's very different. And even within regions, within countries, can be very, very different. Now you've kind of got the same story going out, but how it's interpreted, how it's told, and the way and the perspectives can be very, very different. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I fully agree. And beyond, just to build on that as well, I mean, it may be the same stories, or it may be that they don't even have a story on the same thing that is trending in your micro sort of sphere. And so I think that's quite lovely in a sense, because over lockdown in particular, I definitely got myself in an anxiety sort of cycle, reading the headlines all the time. But actually, when placed in that wider global context, and the big story in the UK is like number 50 on a more global channel, that's so lovely, because it's almost reassuring. This thing isn't the biggest thing in the world right now. This is the biggest thing in the world. Actually, even that's not that scary, so it's good.
Yeah, no, great points. Great points. Thanks, Joe, for sharing that. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, throughout your journey so far, there must be people that have inspired you, or that you admire, or that you've looked up to, or maybe it's a personal character trait that you admire more than anything else. But when I ask you that type of question, what springs to mind?
So definitely the latter, in the sense that I think I tend to take specific traits from the people who surround me, rather than sort of taking people as their totality. I think there's a lot of nuance in everyone. But I think of people like James, my co-founder, who is an individual who is perpetually proactive, is a human being who is always looking for solutions to problems, who is uplifting and supportive in a way that I've never experienced another human being to be in a business context. I look at people like Max Hopkinson, who fought his fears in public speaking and went on to create a public speaking club in the Keynote Club, whose business brain just works in a special way, and uses his business activities to then feed charitable endeavors. I think of people like Alex Wright, who sits on a board, who's just like thoughtful and lovely, and exactly to the point. I mean, I don't want to go on too long, because these are all examples of humans that aren't necessarily well known, but exactly to your point, you take these character traits from every one of them, and hopefully you bring that into yourself, without meaning to get too hippy dippy about it. I think that is what legacy is. That is, people speak about statues, You know, they speak about awards, they speak about titles, but I think the greatest legacy that we can have between us all is passing on these character traits that become part of us, that then become part of the people that we surround ourselves and love. And really, that's what I think about with the Marketing Meetup, is that actually, as much as we're educating, connecting, building confidence, the thing that I kind of want, the legacy that I want to leave behind, is one where people have no idea that it was us. They have no idea that like us being kind to people has meant that they are more kind to others, and that gets passed through the generations. Like, that is a life well lived, and that's kind of where we want to be. So yeah.
No, 100%. I think, you know, the more that we can spread that meaningfulness while being kind to each other, I think that's a really positive place. The other thing I wanted to ask you, just building on that a little bit then. So you've mentioned a few people there, and we've talked a little bit about character traits. But what about advice? When I ask you about advice that you've received along the way, now it can be from any of the people that you've mentioned. It might be back to your childhood, or it might be something that happened to you yesterday. Is there any advice that you've taken to heart that stuck with you? And sometimes I say to people, look, it might be that I wish somebody had told me that years ago, kind of advice. Or do you find yourself offering advice to others that you'd like to share with us today?
So the best piece of advice that I've ever got from my dad is don't give advice. Share your experiences and opinions, which means to say that I think so many times when we give advice, we think that it's correct, but it's probably just correct for our context. And so actually the thing that I think is more wise to do so regularly is share an opinion or an experience and frame it quite deliberately in that context. And generally speaking, even though that sounds like a bit of a cop-out, and so I think what it does is it enables us to open up a world of things such as storytelling and, you know, sort of sharing advice and having a bit of nuance about these conversations. I think so often we feel pressure from the advice that we're given to act or behave in a certain way. But I think what we can do with opinions or experience is say, if this worked for me, it may not work for you, but this was my experience, and hopefully that will help. And so on the surface level, it's a cop-out answer, but I think there is a bit more depth to it, and something which I've really appreciated, to the point where actually if someone says what you need to do is ... to me, it's a trigger point for me to go, oh God, I need to get out of this conversation right now. So
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that too. The other thing I wanted to ask you about before we definitely run out of time, is over the next 3, 6, 12 months, I'm not sure whether you're working week to week, month to month, whether you're planning years in advance. How does that work for you? But also, what are you hoping to achieve over the next year? What's on your sort of to-do list? What are you hoping to do? Because you've had a lot of success. It continues to grow. You're adding lovely people by the day. So what's the next 12 months look like for you? How do you go about planning?
So planning is probably done, I would say, every sort of 10 to 12 weeks. So what's that? That's like a quarter, almost by accident. But more because that's how we structure our seasons of webinars. And so we will organize our webinars and release them in seasons. And so we'll go on a cycle where you're working your way through the season, and then you curate the next. And so that's typically the way that I think about it. So the next season, the season 10, I know that'll kick off in about April. That means I need to start planning it in sort of mid-Feb sort of thing. So that's how I think about it. Which I think is useful in our world, in the world of the Marketing Meetup, because we're speaking about topics that are relevant to folks, hopefully. So in the next season, for sure, once the dust has settled a little bit more on ChatGPT and AI, for example, if we'd done a 12-month in advance schedule, we wouldn't be getting that until 2024. But we know that in the next season, we're probably going to look to curate at least a session a week towards that discussion, and that feels really productive. In terms of the next 12 months, I don't know. Like, I think for us right now, there's a couple of interesting things going on. So the first is we're growing out the locations in a big way. So in September last year, we had 11. We have 22 now. I'd expect in a couple of months we'll have 34. And so, there's a lot of onboarding that goes on with that. We did, as I said, already mentioned, a lot of work to build processes and standards at the end of last year. So there's a continuation of that. That will be something big. The second thing that I think is going to be really important for the Marketing Meetup as a commercial element, because we're a for-profit company, is that there isn't really any way that folks can buy anything from us, which sounds crazy, but we operate on a sponsorship model. Now, we have some fantastic sponsors. We're very, very lucky. But we also have to acknowledge that in the global sphere right now, then you only need to look at the headlines and the tech layoffs that exist in the world to know that people aren't necessarily going to be spending money in the same way as they were on marketing. And so acknowledging that, then we need to be seriously looking at our business model as well over the next 12 months and saying, how can we build the community, continue to build the community, but also make sure that, like, rule number one, we're still in business. And, we're not in danger of going out of business. That's not where we are, gladly. We're small, we're lean and stuff like that. But building a sustainable business is not only important for business survival, I think it's very good for mental well-being as well. And so that's certainly where we are for the next 12 months. It's like, how can we make sure we do both? How can we live in a world of both kindness, growth, loveliness, but also making sure that we're here so we can serve the people we want to, because you can't have one without the other. So that's where we are.
So a large spoonful of more loveliness, some scale and some event growth and some community growth, but also some future proofing in there, making sure that it's there for the long term. And it's back to that word legacy that you mentioned earlier as well, that you're building something for the long term.
That's it. I used to work for a company who had a little. They used to have a take on companies that are just built to sell, and the thing for them was, you should probably be looking to build a business that lasts 100 years than 3. And I think, regardless of what happens in the long-term future of the Marketing Meetup, then the thing I know that I would love is that it remains a kind, safe, welcoming place where people can come to, and you can only do that by taking your time. There's a lovely quote from a guy called David Hyatt, actually, which is, you don't judge the success of an acorn after a week, but come back after 100 years and you've got a beautiful oak tree. And I think our ambitions are firmly set on the oak tree rather than an acorn. So yeah, that's where we are, really.
That's wonderful advice. I like that a lot, Joe. I will definitely be using that. The last thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up today is there any other area or any other sort of focus that you'd like to bring to our international audience today? But also, and importantly, if people want to find out about this lovely community and get more involved with the Marketing Meetup, or find out more about events maybe in their area, or tune into the podcast or the videos, the webinars, where are you sending people to?
So folks can probably best interact with the Marketing Meetup, our events, on our website, which is very imaginatively URL'd, themarketingmeetup.com. And you could even do marketingmeetup.com as well, because we've got that domain. So you could do one of those two. Right there, you'll find our newsletter, which I'd encourage folks to sign up for, and also sign up for our events. We're also looking for folks to run events closer to their house. So wherever you may be around the world, then we would like to open up as many events as we can, with the caveat that it's done with the values that we set out in the first instance. And so we're always open for conversations on that. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm joe@themarketingmeetup.com. Just drop me a note and we'll see what we can do. So I wouldn't be so bold to profess any area where people should be looking beyond that, because I think very much in the theme of our conversation, context is so different that I don't want to give advice that isn't appropriate for folks.
Well, Joe, listen, thanks so much indeed for spending some time with me today. It's been wonderful to hear a little bit about what goes into creating this lovely global community that you have. You know, it is positively lovely, and congratulations on all the success. And I really do appreciate and admire everything that you're doing there at the Marketing Meetup. It's such an important community and an important strategy. So thank you for everything that you're doing now.
Thank you. You're very, very lovely. I know that admiration goes both ways. I appreciate it.
Well, that brings us nicely to the end of today's discussion with Joe Glover. Thanks to Joe. Thanks to everybody for watching and listening to us today. I'd love you to like, subscribe, follow, do all the things we need you to do to help support this podcast. And hopefully you'll join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So thank you, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.